Let's look at some Bible stories of people pleasing gone wrong. These examples show us how trying to make others happy can lead to disaster, even when you have the best intentions. And honestly, these lessons are just as relevant today as they were back then. The story of the young prophet and the old prophet. 1 Kings 13, 1 through 26. This story begins with a prophet sent by God to deliver a stern message of judgment to King Jeroboam. The young prophet boldly confronted the king at the altar in Bethel, declaring that the idolatrous practices Jeroboam had established would one day be destroyed. To prove the legitimacy of his message, God gave the prophet a sign. The altar split apart, and ashes spilled out, just as the prophet had foretold. After witnessing this miraculous event, King Jeroboam stretched out his hand to order the prophet's arrest, but his hand immediately withered, rendering it useless. Alarmed, the king begged the prophet to pray for its restoration. The prophet prayed, and God mercifully restored the king's hand. Despite Jeroboam's offer of a reward and an invitation to dine with him, the prophet refused, explaining that God had commanded him not to eat or drink or return the same way he came. The young prophet set off on his journey home, obediently following God's instructions until an older prophet entered the picture. The older prophet, who lived nearby, heard about the young prophet's miraculous deeds and sought him out. When he found him resting under an oak tree, he invited the young prophet to his home for a meal. Initially, the young prophet declined, explaining that God had strictly forbidden him from eating or drinking in that place. But the older prophet persisted. He lied, saying, "I too am a prophet, and an angel of the Lord told me to bring you to my house and give you something to eat and drink." Trusting the older prophet's word, the young prophet abandoned God's command and followed him home. While they were eating, the older prophet suddenly received a true message from God. The older prophet declared that because the young prophet had disobeyed God's direct command, he would face grave consequences. The young prophet left the house in sorrow, and as he traveled, a lion attacked and killed him on the road. The younger prophet probably didn't want to offend the older prophet. It's hard to say no to someone you respect, right? But look what happened. To make matters worse, after luring the younger prophet into disobedience, the older prophet was the same person who publicly declared to others that the younger prophet had disobeyed God, resulting in his punishment. This shows how the same people who cheer us on to compromise our values can turn around and criticize us when we face the consequences. Obeying God's voice should always come first. The story of King Saul and the Gibeonites. 2 Samuel 21, 1 through 9. The story unfolds during the reign of King David, many years after King Saul's rule. A severe famine had gripped the land for 3 years, and the people were suffering. David, realizing this wasn't a normal occurrence, sought the Lord to understand why the famine had struck. God revealed that it was because of an unaddressed sin from Saul's reign. Saul had broken a covenant with the Gibeonites. To understand the weight of Saul's actions, we need to go back to the time of Joshua. When the Israelites first entered the Promised Land, they encountered the Gibeonites, a people who feared being destroyed by the Israelites. In an attempt to save themselves, the Gibeonites deceived Joshua into making a covenant of peace with them. Even after their deception was uncovered, the covenant stood, as it had been made, in God's name. The Israelites vowed to let the Gibeonites live, and this agreement remained binding for generations. Fast forward to Saul's reign. In his zeal for Israel, Saul decided to eliminate the Gibeonites, breaking the sacred covenant and spilling innocent blood. Why? Likely to curry favor with the Israelites and prove his loyalty to them. While the Bible doesn't give all the details of Saul's actions, we know they were severe enough to bring God's judgment on the land. During the famine, David called the Gibeonites to ask how he could make amends for Saul's sin. The Gibeonites, who had suffered great losses, refused monetary compensation. Instead, they demanded justice. 7 male descendants of Saul were to be handed over to them and executed. Though this was a heavy and heartbreaking demand, David agreed, understanding the seriousness of Saul's broken covenant before God. Saul's choice to prioritize human approval over obedience to God's laws had far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for his descendants and the entire nation of Israel. People-pleasing doesn't just affect you. It can have a ripple effect on others, even generations later. It's never worth the cost. In the story of Aaron and the golden calf, Exodus 32:1-6, the Israelites had just experienced a series of miraculous events. God had delivered them from slavery in Egypt, parted the Red Sea, and provided for their needs in the wilderness. Now, they were camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, where Moses had gone up to meet with God and receive his commandments. But Moses stayed on the mountain for 40 days, and in his absence, the people grew restless. Impatience turned to doubt. The Israelites began to question whether Moses would ever return. They were unsettled by the uncertainty and demanded a tangible representation of a God they could worship. Turning to Aaron, Moses' brother and their temporary leader, they said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Instead of standing firm and reminding the people of God's power and faithfulness, Aaron gave in to their demands. He asked them to bring him their gold earrings, which he melted down and shaped into a golden calf. Once the idol was complete, Aaron declared, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." The people celebrated, offering sacrifices to the calf and indulging in revelry and idolatrous practices. Meanwhile, on Mount Sinai, God saw what was happening in the camp. His anger burned against the Israelites for their blatant disobedience and idolatry, especially so soon after he had revealed his power to them. God told Moses about their sin and threatened to destroy the entire nation. Moses, however, interceded on behalf of the people, pleading for God's mercy and reminding him of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As punishment, many of the Israelites died that day, either by the sword or as a result of God's judgment. Though Aaron was spared, he had to face the reality that his desire to please the people had led the entire community into sin and brought severe consequences upon them all. For Christians today, the golden calf is a powerful symbol of the dangers of placing anything, whether people's opinions, material possessions, or cultural expectations, above God in our lives. Standing firm in God's commands might feel hard in the moment, but it's the only way to honor Him and protect those around you. These stories might be ancient, but their lessons are timeless. Whether it's compromising your values, breaking promises, or choosing popularity over justice, people-pleasing is a dangerous trap. And here's the thing, the same people you're bending over backward to please might not even stand by you when the consequences roll in. But here's the good news, we don't have to live this way. When we shift our focus from pleasing people to pleasing God, we break free from these harmful patterns. God's approval is constant, fulfilling, and never comes at the cost of our peace or purpose. Here's how you can avoid falling into the people-pleasing cycle as a Christian. 1. Before making a decision, pause and ask yourself, will this please God or just make someone else happy at the expense of my faith. Let God's approval guide your choices. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." From this verse we see that our efforts should be aimed at pleasing God, not people. Why? Because people's opinions are fickle. One minute, you're their favorite, and the next, you're on their bad side. But God's approval is steady, eternal, and rooted in His unchanging love for you. 2. Memorize key scriptures that strengthen your convictions. When the pressure to compromise hits, those verses will remind you to stay strong. One of the best examples of standing firm in the Bible is Daniel. When Nebuchadnezzar set up that golden image and demanded everyone bow down to it, Daniel and his friends refused to compromise their faith, even when faced with a fiery furnace. Literally, standing firm in your convictions might not always be popular, but it's the right thing to do. You might lose some approval along the way, but you'll gain something far more important: God's favor and peace in your heart. 3. Make prayer a daily habit. Start your morning by asking God for wisdom to handle the day's challenges and for the courage to stand firm in your faith. Avoiding people-pleasing isn't easy. That's why prayer is so important. James 1:5 gives us a simple but powerful promise. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. When you feel torn between pleasing others and obeying God, ask Him for wisdom to make the right choice. Pray for courage too, because standing firm often requires bravery. God loves to equip His children, so don't hesitate to bring your struggles to Him. 4. Seek out a church group, Bible study, or Christian mentor who can support you in your walk with God. Having accountability partners makes it easier to resist the urge to people please. Here's a gem from Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Who you surround yourself with matters. If your friends or mentors are constantly pushing you to compromise your faith, it's time to reevaluate those relationships. Avoiding people-pleasing as a Christian isn't about becoming rude or insensitive. It's about standing firm in your convictions. If you've enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. It only takes a second, but it will make a huge difference for this new channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.